I knew I was in for a long day the moment I saw that neon pink sticky note slapped on my windshield. Your vehicle is in violation and will be towed. HOA Compliance Officer, Audrina Vance. There it was, her name, big and bold, like she wanted me to know exactly who was behind it. Audrina was the queen bee of our HOA. Middle-aged, bleach blonde bob, always in a leopard print blouse and clutching her little clipboard like it held national secrets. The kind of woman who treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. I'm Trenton Easley. I've lived in this neighborhood for 12 years. I'm a mechanic by trade, and yeah, fun twist, I own Easley Tow and Recovery, the largest towing company in the county. The irony was so thick I could taste it. The truck she tagged was my personal work truck, a black 21 Silverado with my company logo on the side. It was spotless, parked perfectly in my own damn driveway. The only violation was in her head. I was still staring at the note when I heard high heels clicking up the sidewalk. "Oh good, you saw it," Audrina announced, arms crossed like she was about to hand me a speeding ticket. "Commercial vehicles are not permitted in residential driveways overnight. HOA Guidelines, page 7. "It's my driveway," I said, folding the note and slipping it into my back pocket. "And it's registered to this address." "It's still a violation," she sniffed, "and I've already called for a tow. It'll be gone within the hour." I couldn't help but laugh. "You called a tow truck?" "Yes," she said, tilting her chin like she'd just won a war. "From Big County Tow." "They said they'll be here soon." I whistled low. "Big County, that's cute. I bought them out 3 months ago." Her face twitched. "No, you're mistaken. I spoke to a manager." "That manager's name wouldn't happen to be Darrell, would it?" She blinked. "Yes, Darrell works for me. I own the company." Every truck, every driver, every contract. For a second, Audrina just stood there like her brain was buffering. Then her eyes narrowed. "That's a conflict of interest." "No," I said calmly. "What you did was illegal. You tried to tow a legally parked, privately owned vehicle from private property. That's called unlawful interference with personal property. And since I keep all call logs recorded, we've got your voice authorizing it." Her mouth opened, then shut. She turned a deep red and snapped, "You'll be hearing from the board." "Can't wait," I said, already walking back toward the house. "Make sure they bring snacks." I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. Audrina wasn't just power-hungry, she was obsessed. And I had no idea how far she was willing to go until the very next morning, when I woke up to find my truck completely gone, not towed, stolen. I stood in the middle of my driveway, staring at the wide oil stain where my truck used to be. No glass, no tire marks, nothing to indicate a break-in or forced entry. It was just gone, like it had vanished into thin air. I didn't panic. I went straight into my garage and pulled the hard drive from the security cameras mounted under the eaves. I'd installed the system myself, infrared, motion activated, looped to cloud backup, the works. I fast-forwarded through the footage from 1 a.m. to 5, and there it was. At 3:47 in the morning, a white flatbed with no company logos or decals backed into my driveway. 2 guys in black hoodies and gloves got out, loaded my Silverado like they knew exactly what they were doing, and were gone in under 7 minutes. No hesitation, no fumbling. Whoever they were, this wasn't their first job. I paused the frame and zoomed in on the license plate. Nothing. Covered in tape. I took a deep breath, shut the laptop, and called an old friend, Detective Lena Morales with the County Sheriff's Department. We'd worked together years ago when I helped locate a stolen vehicle ring that was using fake tow trucks. "Trent," she said as soon as she picked up. "You don't usually call unless something's sideways." "Truck's gone," I said. "Taken last night. I've got footage. Looks like a ghost tow operation." "Yours?" she asked, voice flattening. "Yeah, my personal truck. Send me everything. I'll run it through our system." "And Trent, if this is what I think it is, you need to keep this quiet. Let me look into it before you confront anyone." I hung up and uploaded the footage to her secure email. Meanwhile, I started checking my GPS logs. I'd installed a hidden tracker in all my vehicles. Professional habit. I pulled up the last known location of the Silverado. It pinged in a warehouse district on the north end of town, in a dead zone with no street cameras. I wasn't dumb enough to go there myself, not yet. But there was something else. My tracker had gone offline at exactly 4:23 a.m., about 20 minutes after the truck was taken. That meant someone had found and disabled it, which meant whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for. By mid-afternoon, Lena called me back. "Trent, you're not gonna like this. That tow truck in your footage, it's registered to a shell company. No real owner, no real address. We've seen this before. It's how illegal repo crews operate." But here's the kicker. The truck was last seen parked behind a gated property owned by your HOA. I didn't respond right away. My eyes had already drifted to the HOA community center down the street. A beige, two-story building with a marble eagle in front and a flagpole that hadn't flown anything in 3 years. It was locked up most days unless there was a board meeting or one of Audrina's compliance walkthroughs. Lena continued. "I can't get a warrant without more, but if you have access to the HOA's bylaws or internal documents, anything that points to them overstepping their legal authority or working with outside contractors without resident approval, that would help." "I've got a neighbor," I said. "Retired CPA. Keeps every piece of paper the HOA ever sends. If there's a contract, he'll have it. Get it. And Trent, be careful, these people are organized." I walked 3 houses down to see Mr. Henry Lamont. 72, ex-IRS auditor and the kind of man who labeled his spice rack alphabetically. He answered before I even knocked. "I saw the truck was missing," he said, stepping aside so I could enter. "I figured something was up. I need every financial record the HOA's issued in the last year, especially anything involving outside vendors." Henry was already walking to his filing cabinet. "Audrina's been authorizing expenditures without board votes. I've been documenting it for months." He handed me a folder thicker than a phone book. Inside were itemized lists, landscaping fees that tripled overnight, security patrols billed to a company with no valid state license, and there it was a towing contract issued to Quick Compliance Solutions, LLC, for after-hours vehicle enforcement. I flipped to the signature page. No board members, just Audrina's name scrawled in blue ink. "Did the board approve this?" I asked. "They don't even know about it," Henry said. "She's been issuing these contracts under emergency authority clauses, which is only legal during declared emergencies. And guess what? There haven't been any." I scanned the contract again and saw something that made my stomach turn. Clause 17. Vehicles deemed non-compliant may be removed without owner consent if deemed necessary by the compliance officer. "She wrote herself permission to steal property," I muttered. "She thinks she's untouchable," Henry said. "But I've reported her before. Nothing ever happens." "That's because she's careful, doesn't leave a trail, but this time, she left tire tracks." I took the documents and drove straight to Lena's precinct. By the time I got there, she'd already pulled property tax records on the shell company. Quick Compliance Solutions was registered under a holding trust, and guess whose name was buried in the paperwork? Audrina Vance. She'd created a fake company, signed a contract with herself, and used it to tow vehicles she personally disliked, all under the guise of HOA enforcement. She didn't just cross a line, she torched it. Lena leaned back in her chair and exhaled. "I can get a warrant now." "Do it fast," I said. "Because if I know Audrina, she'll panic the second she realizes I'm not backing off." The next morning, sheriff's deputies served the warrant at the HOA's maintenance lot behind the community center. What they found was worse than I expected. Not only was my truck there, stripped of its plates and halfway covered with a tarp, but there were 3 other vehicles, 2 SUVs and a sedan, all traced back to homeowners who had recently violated HOA rules. One of them belonged to an elderly widow who'd gotten a notice last month for having improper hedging. Another was owned by a single mom who let her teenager park on the street during finals week. Audrina wasn't enforcing the rules. She was running a racket. Lena brought her in for questioning that afternoon. Audrina showed up in pearls and a pantsuit like she was attending a brunch, not a criminal interview. I wasn't allowed in the room, but Lena told me later. Audrina denied everything right up until they showed her the contract with her name, the shell company registration, and the security footage of the unauthorized tow. She still tried to claim it was an authorized enforcement action. But once Lena showed her the financial records and the missing trucks, her lawyer all but dragged her out of the room to beg for a deal. She was charged with grand theft auto, fraud, misuse of HOA funds, and operating an unlicensed towing enterprise. The board called an emergency meeting that night and voted unanimously to suspend her indefinitely. But the fallout was just beginning, because I wasn't done, not by a long shot. By the end of the week, the entire neighborhood was buzzing louder than a lawnmower at dawn. News vans had started showing up outside the entrance, nosing around with microphones and cameras. Someone must have tipped off Channel 9 because by Thursday evening, Audrina's mugshot was on the evening broadcast, wedged between segments about heat advisories and a cat that played the piano. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. I'd lived in this neighborhood long enough to know how slippery these HOA types could be. They had a way of landing on their feet, even after getting caught mid-scheme. But I'd also never seen them cornered like this, and I wasn't going to let this end with a slap on the wrist. The next morning, I met Lena outside the courthouse. She had a folder under one arm and a look that said she hadn't slept in a while. "She's trying to cut a deal," she said as we walked up the steps. Claiming she was acting under emergency authority granted by a supermajority vote. "She manufactured that clause herself," I said. "It's not even legal. Doesn't matter. Her lawyer's arguing precedent says other HOAs have done similar things in crisis conditions." "What crisis?" I asked. She's citing a string of increased vandalism reports, all of which she filed herself. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old paper and air conditioning. The bailiff led us to a side bench near the front, while Audrina sat at the defense table with a stiff-jawed attorney in a pinstripe suit. She looked smaller than usual. No clipboard, no sunglasses, no leopard print. Just a gray dress and a nervous twitch in her left eye. The judge called the session to order and asked for preliminary statements. The prosecution laid out the charges: unlawful seizure of property, embezzlement through shell contracts, and misuse of HOA authority to carry out private operations without transparency. Then they introduced the evidence: the forged towing agreements, the misappropriated funds, and the footage from my home cameras. Audrina's attorney stood up, adjusted his tie, and launched into a ridiculous monologue about community integrity and the burden of enforcement falling unfairly on one woman's shoulders. He tried to paint her as an overworked volunteer who had been desperately trying to preserve order during a time of local unrest. The judge wasn't buying it. He leaned forward and asked, "Did your client profit personally from the contracts she signed?" "Yes," the lawyer admitted after a long pause, "but only as compensation for the risks she undertook in enforcing compliance." That got an audible scoff from someone in the gallery, probably Henry. The judge ordered Audrina held on bond and scheduled a formal hearing the following week. As she was led out of the courtroom, she looked at me for the first time since this started, not with anger or confidence, just cold, hollow calculation, like she was already planning her next move. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered: neighbors, reporters, and even a few ex-board members who'd kept quiet for too long. One of them, a wiry guy named Curtis, walked up to me with a file folder. "You're not the only one she went after," he said. "I found this in last year's audit records. She rerouted dues into a separate fund labeled Community Reserve B, except that account doesn't exist with the bank we use." I flipped through the documents: wire transfers, fake vendor invoices, and an address in another state, Nevada. "She was moving money off the books," I muttered. "It's worse than that," he said. "She tried to buy a property out there, a fixer-upper, cash offer." I took the folder to Lena that afternoon. She made a quick call to the local FBI field office. Wire fraud and interstate financial manipulation meant federal jurisdiction. By the next morning, a forensic accountant was digging through every HOA ledger from the last 5 years. Meanwhile, the board scrambled to distance themselves. They held a neighborhood meeting in the community center, the first actual open meeting in over a year. I showed up early, took a seat in the front row, and waited to see who had the guts to show their face. 5 members walked in, all looking like they'd aged 10 years overnight. The acting president, a guy named Martin who used to manage a mattress store, stepped up to the podium. "We want to sincerely apologize for the recent events," he began, voice shaking. "The board was unaware of many of the actions taken by Miss Vance, and we are cooperating fully with the authorities. You didn't notice hundreds of thousands of dollars going missing," someone called from the back. "We trusted her to handle operational matters." "You trusted her with your eyes shut," I said, standing. "She signed off on contracts with a company she owned, used a fake emergency clause to bypass votes, and authorized illegal seizures. You sat on your hands the entire time." Martin wiped his forehead with a napkin. "We're forming an independent oversight committee." "No," I interrupted. "You're resigning, all of you." A hush fell over the room. "You let her run unchecked," I continued. "You didn't ask questions when the landscaping budget doubled. You didn't notice when homeowners were being fined for things that aren't even in the bylaws. Either you were complicit or you were negligent. Either way, you're done." A few people clapped, then a few more, then the whole room. Martin looked like he wanted to disappear. By unanimous vote, the board was dissolved that night. A temporary steering committee was formed, made up of longtime residents like Henry, Curtis, and a retired school principal named Darlene who'd been quietly collecting violation notices for months. We didn't waste time. The next day, we called for a forensic audit and retained a local firm to comb through every dollar spent under Audrina's watch. We also filed a civil suit on behalf of every homeowner whose vehicle had been illegally towed or whose dues had been misused. A week later, I got my truck back. The county impound yard released it after the court cleared it from evidence. It still had the faint outline of the adhesive from where the logo had been stripped, but otherwise, it was intact. I drove it home slow, windows down, radio off, letting the silence soak in. That night, I parked it in the same driveway Audrina once tried to claim wasn't mine to use. I didn't need a security system anymore, but I left the cameras up anyway. Not for protection, just for principle. The neighborhood changed after that. People started talking to each other more. They stopped whispering about fines and started asking questions at meetings. We rewrote the bylaws with real checks and balances. No more emergency clauses, no more unchecked authority, and no more Audrina. She took a plea deal, eventually 5 years probation, restitution, loss of any future HOA involvement. She tried to move to a neighboring development, but word got around. No board would touch her. Her name became shorthand for corruption. A cautionary tale. As for me, I didn't run for a board seat. I didn't need to. I'd already done what I set out to do: protect my home, my neighbors, and make sure no one else would ever be bullied by a clipboard and a fake smile. One evening, while I was working under the hood of a neighbor's car, Darlene walked over with a paper cup of lemonade and said, "You know, Trenton, we ought to name something after you." I laughed, wiping my hands with a rag. "Yeah, what?" "A cul-de-sac." "No," she said, "something more fitting." A week later, they installed a new sign in front of the community center, not flashy, just a small plaque next to the door, in honor of those who defend what's right. Easley Hall. Justice doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes, it parks itself right where it belongs. The sun was just starting to drop behind the rooftops when the first HOA lawsuit landed on my porch. Courier dropped it off in a crisp manila envelope. No knock, no greeting. Just left it wedged between the door and the frame like a passive-aggressive neighbor delivering gluten-free cookies with a threat folded inside. Inside were 32 pages of legal gymnastics. Legalese stacked on legalese, all tying back to a claim that I had defamed the HOA and intentionally disrupted community operations, which, according to them, had caused irreparable harm to the reputation and fiduciary stability of the association. It was laughable. But it also showed their hand. The remaining board members, the ones who hadn't resigned in disgrace, were trying to salvage what was left of their control by flipping the narrative. They were betting I'd back down now that the headlines had faded and the news vans had rolled out. I grabbed the envelope and walked straight over to Darlene's house. Her porch light was on, and the smell of fried okra drifted through the screen door. "They're suing you now?" she asked, flipping through the pages with her reading glasses hanging halfway down her nose. "Looks that way," I said. "Apparently, exposing a theft ring and stopping unlawful towing is bad for morale." She squinted at the signature on the last page. "This isn't even an attorney, this is from a corporate mediator. They're trying to scare you into a settlement." That's what I figured. Across the street, Henry stepped outside with a thermos and joined us on the porch. "They're bluffing. I read their financials again this morning. They're hemorrhaging dues. Nobody wants to pay into a system they don't trust. They're desperate." I leaned back in the rocking chair. "Desperate people do stupid things, and these folks are running out of stupid." That night I didn't sleep much. Not because I was worried, but because I knew what was coming next, and sure enough, the next morning I got the call from Lena. "They've filed for declaratory relief," she said. "They're trying to get a judge to pre-approve their authority to fine and discipline without a full board. Can they do that? They can try, but it's a long shot, especially not with the paper trail you've got. The judge is requesting a full evidentiary hearing." I rubbed the back of my neck. "Let me guess. They're going to try and use the hearing to legitimize everything Audrina did retroactively." "Exactly. If the judge sides with them, they'll argue that all past actions were under implied authority. Then we make sure the judge sees everything," I said. "Not just the contracts, the intimidation, the backdoor fines. All of it." Over the next week, I worked with Darlene and Henry to collect testimonies from residents. We gathered over 40 signed affidavits from homeowners who'd received threats, baseless violations, or unexplained increases in dues. One woman, a nurse named Kayla, had been fined over $500 for disruptive vehicle noise when her car alarm went off during a storm. Another couple had been told their children couldn't use chalk on the sidewalk because it violated visual uniformity. We compiled every one of those into a binder the size of a toaster oven. When the day of the hearing arrived, the courthouse was overflowing. Not because it was a criminal trial, this was civil court, but because word had gotten around. Residents came in droves. Some wore shirts that said driveways are not crimes. Others brought lawn chairs and sat outside the building like it was a block party. Inside, the courtroom was packed shoulder to shoulder. Darlene sat beside me. Henry was 2 rows back with a notepad and a thermos of coffee. Lena stood at the aisle, arms crossed, not as a cop this time, but as a witness. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Leona Whitaker, called the session to order. The HOA's stand-in counsel, a balding man with a stiff collar and a nasal voice, stood and began his argument. "Your Honor, the association acted in good faith under its governing documents. The nature of community governance requires swift action, and the compliance officer at the time, Miss Vance, was operating under a legitimate interpretation of emergency authority." Judge Whitaker lifted one eyebrow. "So you're asking this court to declare that the board had the right to bypass its own quorum rules, approve contracts with undisclosed personal interest, and forcibly remove private property without due process?" "Under specific conditions, yes, Your Honor." She looked unimpressed. When it was our turn, I walked to the front with the binder in hand. I laid it on the evidence table with a quiet thump. "Your Honor," I said, "what this board wants isn't legitimacy, it's a retroactive permission slip. They didn't follow the rules. They didn't ask the community. They didn't even follow state law. They hired a towing operation owned by the compliance officer herself, stole vehicles from driveways, and pocketed the funds. And now that they've been caught, they want this court to pretend it all never happened. I nodded toward Lena, who handed the judge a flash drive. On this drive is voice evidence, financial records, and surveillance footage. It proves that not only did the HOA act outside its authority, but they did so with full knowledge of the legal limits. Judge Whitaker inserted the drive into a laptop. For the next 15 minutes, the room was silent except for the sound of Audrina's voice authorizing a tow, the footage of my truck being illegally taken, and the line-by-line summary of the fake contracts with her signature. When it ended, the judge leaned forward. "I've seen enough. The request for declaratory relief is denied. Furthermore, I am issuing a court order dissolving the current HOA board, effective immediately. A temporary fiduciary will be appointed by the county until a new board is elected. All enforcement actions taken under the unlawful contract are void. And all homeowners affected may pursue damages in small claims or civil court." The courtroom didn't cheer, not at first. It was more like a collective exhale. Like a pressure valve had finally been released after years of tension. Outside, the crowd began clapping, not wild applause. Just steady, grateful. Some people were crying, others were hugging. One guy lifted his toddler onto his shoulders and pointed at the courthouse like it was the Lincoln Memorial. I stood off to the side, watching it all unfold. Darlene came up beside me, holding a clipboard with fresh petition forms. "We're forming a new board next month," she said. "Fair elections, 1 vote per household, no emergency clauses, you in?" I shook my head. "I'll help." "But I'm not running." "Why not?" "Because I think we just proved something," I said. "You don't need a title to do the right thing." She smiled and handed me a pen anyway. "Then help me write the new bylaws." That evening, I returned home and found something sitting on my porch. It was a metal sign, about the size of a license plate with a simple engraving. "This driveway is defended by Easley Tow and Recovery." Henry must have had it made. I hung it up next to my porch light, not as a warning, but as a reminder. A reminder that no matter how deep the power runs, or how loud the rules are shouted, there's always a way to stand your ground. And sometimes, standing your ground means parking your truck right where it belongs and daring anyone to try and move it again.